In this video, I'm going to show you how to prep a song for mixing by another engineer other than yourself. In this video, I'm going to do it under the assumption that the mixer you're sending it to doesn't use the same DAW as you and has asked for the raw audio and a tempo map. There's a couple of things that really bother me about sessions I get from other people, specifically track files aren't the same length, so parts don't line up properly with timing, or maybe they were really lazy with the labeling and you get files called like audio 1 and audio 2. It's just kind of silly. So in this video, I'm going to try and show you the right way to do it and the easiest way. So in this session, you'll see that there's a MIDI sub bass. There is some drum tracks, a couple of bass tracks here, some guitars, an organ, and some vocal tracks. Now, this is a session that I did personally, so the editing is actually already done. But for the purpose of this video, I made a couple cuts on the drums, and I cut out some parts in the vocal just to show you guys kind of what needs to be done. What I would recommend, though, is when you edit something, just consolidate it from beginning to end like this bass track. Now on the drums, I copied the second chorus to the first chorus, and I didn't do the fades on purpose for this video. So what I want to do is I want to go in and double check that edit, make the fades, clean it up, because there's nothing worse than getting songs to mix and there's clicks and pops or just like lazy editing that could have easily been fixed. So I'll just check that real quick, edit's clean, and we're good to move on to something else. Now I'm looking at the guitars, they're all pretty good, and even the vocals here, although they look chopped up, they've all been cleaned already with good clean beginning and ends. So the next thing I would do is you need to find the tracks that need to be printed. Specifically, this MIDI sub bass will definitely need to be printed because it has expand on it, which is unavailable to anybody but Pro Tools users. So I need to make a stereo audio file of that or a mono audio file, whatever it is. In this particular case, there is some panning in the sound. So I've made a stereo audio track, already pre-routed it to it through the busing system. And you can see here the inputs and outputs are the same. And then what I do is I put it into record and I also solo the two tracks because with the way Pro Tools works and there's no auto labeling of the buses, it's really easy to accidentally send your verbs or effects to a printing track as well. So soloing it, just make sure that doesn't happen. The next thing I would do is I'd go through and find other sounds that need to be printed. This particular song, there is a mono verse guitar that had a stereo flange added, which I definitely want the mixer to have. But at the same time, I also want to give him the option to change the sound however he wants. So same thing again, I make a file, set the inputs, put it into record, solo, and we're good to go. You'll notice on the bass track there's an EQ and a compressor. I wouldn't send those to the mixer. You want them to have as much control as possible, so I would just bypass those and not print them at all. And then finally, just check over the session, make sure you haven't missed anything, because it's a lot easier to do this all at once. And then if you're ready, you just hit record and let it run. So while that's printing, just real quick about labeling. Just label your tracks, whatever they are. Keep the name short, but not so short that it's impossible to know what it is. I'd say within 7 characters if you can. 9 is okay. Just label the tracks so a mixer knows what they are, because there's nothing worse than getting something that says audio 1 or like take 65 guitar solo, etc., etc. It's just a pain. Now that those are done printing, you can just take them out of record and unsolo. The next thing I would do is I would look to see if there's any unused playlists. This doesn't necessarily affect a raw bounce, but for me, it's important to do this just so I know if there was a sound that I had put on a playlist that I want the mixer to have. In this case, that's not true, so I'm just going to get rid of this one. Okay, so now we're at the point where it's time to consolidate all these files. You want to select all the files that need consolidating from bar 1 to the end of the song. This is where the labeling comes in handy, because if you actually label your tracks ahead of time, like you should have done from the very beginning of the session, when you consolidate the files, they'll actually have close to the right name. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select all the files that need to be consolidated. We're going to make sure we're up to bar 1, and then just give the session one quick look over to make sure we didn't miss anything, and let it rip. Okay, so now that these files are done, it's time to label them again. I prefer to just have the name with no numbers or dashes, so I go through and manually rename all the files, or I use a renaming program, which you can easily do. There's a lot out of there which will just eliminate the dash and the 0 that's added to the files. However, for this demonstration, I'm just going to do it manually, under the assumption that you've never heard of those programs and do it manually. So you just double click on the region, select the second option in the box, and relabel. And at this point, I will go through and do it insanely, inhumanly fast by fast forwarding and relabel all the tracks in my session. Oh, looks like I missed one at the top, so let's just relabel that. Okay, so now that everything's relabeled, you double checked it all that it's there, it's time to export the tracks to a separate folder on your drive. So at this point, I would just select everything that's in my session from top to bottom and make sure that I select from beginning to end, highlight them all, hit Shift Apple K, or you can search in the menu for just export audio, and make sure that the bit rate and sample rate are the same as my session. Go into the folder in which you plan to export the file to, make a new folder, and the labeling scheme I use is artist name, song name, mix prep, and then the bit depth and sample rate. Just like so. Oh, try that again. And hit export. And now this will dump all those raw files into the folder for you. The reason why I do it this way, instead of just grabbing the files out of the audio files folder, is I'm looking at it right now and I'll know exactly what's going to the mixer. It's easy to miss stuff if you just pull them right out of your audio files folder or your pool or whatever. So this way, there's no doubt everything I'm looking at is going to the guy. And that is now done. So the final thing to do is to export the MIDI for two reasons. One, so he has the sub-bass MIDI in case he wants to change the sound. And the second is so he has the tempo map, including all the markers. I usually use the multi-track. So we'll just export that, put it in the same folder personally, and I usually label it as either tempo map or what the sound is, or if there's only one specific MIDI file, I would label it as both, which is what I just did. And now we're ready to see if this will open up in another DAW properly. So I will now close this down and open up Cubase. Okay, so I'm a noob at Cubase, but what I would do is I would import the MIDI file from the engineer, which is what I will do now. And then I would make a session file folder that I would call band name, song title, mix session, and then the sample rate. So that's what I will do now by making a new folder. You can excuse my terrible typing here. Now that the session's open, I'll make sure that the sample rate and bit depth is the same as what was labeled on the folder, which it is now. And then just to be sure, I will create a tempo map track just to double check that the tempo imported, which it did. And now I will just import the audio from the session that I bounced out. So same folder, select all, open. Let that all import. And there you go. There's my session. Now, one thing with the exporting, some people like to put all the individual instruments into separate folders, like drums, bass, guitar. That's fine. I would almost recommend doing that. For me personally, I end up importing all the audio anyways and sorting through it. So for me personally, one folder works great. For some people, more folders works better. But it's really up to you. And as a final step, I would just relabel this. As I said, band name, song name, mix session 1. And that is how you export a whole session for another mixer.